Hi, American Lit class. We are going to be reading from Farewell to Manzanar today. So this is on page 704 of your textbook. So you want to turn to page 704. We're going to first learn about the authors, and then we'll go from there. Oh, and you need a pen with you. And anytime I mark something on my book, I expect you to mark the same thing on your own book. We're going to be annotating together. So Janine Watuski Houston and James D. Houston. Janine was born in 1934 and James was born in 1933 and died in 2009, co-wrote not only this autobiography, but also a collection of related essays. Each author has also written several works independently. So this is a picture from Manzanar. Manzanar is a town that's located just over our mountains. So this is the other side of the Sierra Nevada mountains that we see if we look to the east from Visalia, but this is the eastern side of those same mountains. And that's where the Manzanar War Relocation Center is located. And you can visit it. It is a national monument. During World War II, the United States fought the Axis powers, which included Japan. Afraid of Japanese sympathizers and driven by racial prejudices, the federal government ordered about 120,000 Japanese Americans to leave their homes and live in facilities known as internment camps. As this excerpt opens, Janine Wakatuski's father arrives at Manzanar, one such internment camp, after his detention on false charges of having aided the enemy. Inu. With Papa back, our cubicle was filled to overflowing. Woody brought in another army bunk and tick mattress up next to Mama's, but that was not what crowded the room. It was Papa himself, his dark, bitter, brooding presence. Once moved in, it seemed he didn't go outside for months. He sat in there or paced alone a great deal of the time. Mama had to bring his meals from the mess hall. He made her bring him extra portions of rice or cans of the syrupy fruit they served. He would save this up and concoct brews and a homemade still he kept behind the door. Brews that smelled so bad, Mama was ashamed to let in any visitors. Day after day, he would sip his rice wine or his apricot brandy, sip till he was blind drunk and passed out. In the morning, he would wake up groaning like the demon in a kabuki drama. He would vomit and then start sipping again. He terrified all of us, lurching around the tiny room, cursing in Japanese and swinging his bottles wildly. No one could pacify him. Mama got nothing but threats and abuse for attempts to comfort him. So her father drank his own alcohol that he made until he passed out. Sorry, it's all blurry. Oh my goodness. Okay. I turned 8 that fall. I remember telling myself that he never went out and never associated with others because he thought he was better than they were and was angry at being forced to live so close to them for the first time in his life. I told myself they whispered about him because he brewed his own foul-smelling wine in our barracks. All of this was partly true, but there were deeper, uglier reasons for his isolation. I first sensed it one night when Mama and I went to the latrine together. By this time, the stalls were partitioned. 2 Terminal Island women. So Terminal Island is a Japanese American community in Los Angeles that was completely destroyed after the inhabitants were interned. 2 Terminal Island women about Mama's age were leaving just as we walked in. They lingered by the doorway, and from inside my stall I could hear them whispering about Papa, deliberately, just loud enough for us to hear. They kept using the word Inu. I knew it meant dog, and I thought at the time they were backbiting him because he never socialized. Spoken Japanese is full of respectful insult words that can be much more cutting than mere vulgarity. They have to do with bad manners, or worse, breaches of faith and loyalty. Years later, I learned that Inu also meant collaborator or informer. Members of the Japanese American Citizens League were being called Inu for having helped the army arrange a peaceful and orderly evacuation. Men who cooperated with camp authorities in any way could be labeled Inu, as well as those genuine informers inside the camp who relayed information to the War Department and to the FBI. So the reasons why I underline this is because this is the reason why they're in these internment camps. The fear that people will inform Japanese soldiers. So instead, they're informing American about what's going on, and they're trying to help Americans. So these people are labeled as Inu. For the women in the late night latrine, Papa was an Inu because he had been released from Fort Lincoln earlier than most of the EC men, many of whom had to remain up there separated from their families throughout the war. After investigating his record, the Justice Department found no reason to detain him any longer. But the rumor was that, as an interpreter, he had access to information from fellow ECs that he later used to buy his release. This whispered charge, added to the shame of everything that had happened to him, was simply more than he could bear. He did not yet have the strength to resist it. He exiled himself like a leper, and he drank. So this was the rumor about her father, was that he was an informant. So the narrator, father, was accused by the other intern people of being an informant. So an informant would be someone that gave information about, like, basically like ratted on whoever was also in that situation. So kind of like, during the witch trials, you would have one person accusing another person of being a witch, and that's how that person didn't get hanged or didn't get punished, is because they were someone who informed about someone else. So the rumor was that the narrator's father was an informant, just like in the Salem witch trials, someone who accused someone else. Okay, so now we're on page 707. Yes, yes, no, no. 27. Are you willing to serve in the armed forces of the United States on combat duty whenever ordered? Yes or no? Will you swear unqualified allegiance to the United States of America and faithfully defend the United States from any or all attack by foreign or domestic forces, and forswear any form of allegiance or obedience to the Japanese emperor or any other foreign government, power, or organization. From the War Relocation Authority Application for Leave Clearance, 1943. Later in December, the administration gave each family a Christmas tree hauled in from the Sierras. A new director had been appointed, and this was his gesture of apology for all the difficulties that had led up to the riot, a promise of better treatment and better times to come. It was an honest gesture, but it wasn't much of a Christmas that year. The presents were makeshift. The wind was roaring. Papa was drunk. Better times were a long way off, and the difficulties, it seemed, had just begun. Early in February, the government's loyalty oath appeared. Everyone 17 and over was required to fill it out. This soon became the most divisive issue of all. It cut deeper than the riot because no one could avoid it, not even Papa. After 5 months of self-imposed isolation, this debate was what finally forced him out of the barracks and into circulation again. At the time, I was too young to understand the problem. I only knew there was no peace in our cubicle for weeks. Block organizers would come to talk to Papa and my brothers. They would huddle over the table a while, muttering like conspirators, sipping tea or one of his concoctions. Their voices gradually would rise to shouts and threats. Mama would try to calm the men down. Papa would tell her to shut up. Then Granny would interrupt and order him to quit disgracing Mama all the time. Once he just shoved Granny across the room, up against the far wall and back into her chair, and where she sat sniffling while the arguments went on. If the organizers weren't there, Papa would argue with Woody, or rather, Woody would listen to Papa lecture him on true loyalty, pacing from bunk to bunk, waving his cane. Listen to me, Woodrow. When a soldier goes into war, he must go believing he is never coming back. This is why the Japanese are such courageous warriors. They are prepared to die. They expect nothing else. But to do that, you must believe in what you're fighting for. If you do not believe, you will not be willing to die. If you are not willing to die, you won't fight well. And if you don't fight well, you'll probably be killed stupidly, for the wrong reason, and unheroically. So tell me, how can you think of going off to fight? Woody always answered softly, respectfully, with a boyish and submissive smile. I will fight well, Papa. In this war? How is it possible? I am an American citizen. America is at war. But look where they have put us. The more of us who go into the army, the sooner the war will be over. The sooner you and Mama will be out of here. Do you think I would risk losing a son for that? You want me to answer no? No, Papa? Do you think that is what I'm telling you? Of course you cannot answer no, no. If you say no, no, you will be shipped back to Japan with all those other Bakatari. But if I answer yes, yes, I will be drafted anyway, no matter how I feel about it. That is why they are giving us the oath to sign. No, that is not true. They are looking for volunteers, and only a fool would volunteer. Papa stared hard at Woody, making this a challenge. Woody shrugged, still smiling his boyish smile, and did not argue. He knew that when the time came he would join the army, and he knew it was pointless to begin the argument again. It was a circle. His duty as a son was to sit and listen to Papa, thrash his way around it, and around it, and around it. So Woody is Papa's son. I'm guessing his name is Woodrow. And basically, he's saying that he's willing to join the army because he's an American citizen. But Papa doesn't want his son to join the army because he doesn't want his son to die for a country that would intern them. See the problem there? A circle, or you might have called it a corral, like Manzanar itself, with no exit save via 3 narrow gates. The first led into the infantry, the second back across the Pacific, The third, called relocation, was just opening up. Interned citizens who could find a job and a sponsor somewhere inland, away from the West Coast, were beginning to trickle out of camp. Okay, so this 3 narrow gates, the exits, this is a metaphor. This is not literal narrow gates. What they're saying is there's 3 ways to get out of Manzanar. The first way was to join the army or join the military and join the fight, World War II. The second was to go back to Japan. And the third was relocation, where you could get a job. So there were only 3 ways out of the camp. 1, join military. 2, go to Japan. Or 3, relocation, which is a job. So you have to get a job somewhere. But the program was bogged down in paperwork. It was taking months to process applications and security clearances. A loyalty statement required of everyone, it was hoped, might save some time and a lot of red tape. This, together with the search for loyal soldiers, had given rise to the ill-fated oath. 2 weeks before the December riot, JACL leaders met in Salt Lake City, so Japanese American Citizens League, leaders met in Salt Lake City and passed a resolution pledging Nisei, second generation Japanese Americans who were born in the United States, pledging Nisei to volunteer out of the camps for military service. In January, the government announced its plan to form an all-Nisei combat regiment. While recruiting for this unit and speeding up the relocation program, the government figured it could simultaneously weed out the disloyal and thus get a clearer idea of exactly how many agents and Japanese sympathizers it actually had to deal with. Okay, so it sounds a lot like the witch trials. So you either join the army or the military and possibly die, or you stay in the camp and you possibly get persecuted and sent to Japan as a Japanese sympathizer, as someone who's disloyal to America, because you're not willing to fight for America, so you're considered disloyal to America. This part of it would have been comical if the results were not so grotesque. No self-respecting espionage agent would willingly admit he was disloyal, yet the very idea of the oath itself, appearing at the end of that first chaotic year, became the final goad that prodded many once loyal citizens to turn militantly anti-American. So this oath turned once loyal citizens to be anti-American because they didn't like the idea of having to prove their loyalty or get sent to the military, sent to fight in the war. From the beginning, Papa knew his own answer would be yes, yes. He agreed with Woody on this much, even though it meant swearing allegiance to the government that had sent him to Fort Lincoln and denying his connections with the one country in the world where he might still have the rights of a citizen. The alternative was worse. If he said no, he could be sent to Tule Lake Camp in Northern California, where all the disloyal were to be assembled for what most people believed would be eventual repatriation to Japan. Papa had no reason to return to Japan. He was too old to start over. He believed America would win the war, and he knew, even after all he'd endured, that if he had a future, it still lay in this country. That's what's more, a move to Tule Lake could mean a further splitting up of our family. This was a hard choice to make, and even harder to hold to. Anti-American feeling in camp ran stronger than ever. Pro-Japan forces were trying to organize a no-no vote by blocks in massive resistance. Others wanted to boycott the oath altogether in a show of non-cooperation, or through the mistaken fear that anyone who accepted the form would be shipped out of camp. The no-nos back to Japan, the yes-yeses into an American society full of wartime hostility and racial hate. A meeting to debate the matter was called in our mess hall. Papa knew that merely showing his face would draw stares and muttered comments. Yes, yes was just what they expected of an Inu, but he had to speak his mind before the no-no contingent carried the block. Saying no-no was an individual was one thing. Bowling the entire camp into it was quite another. At the very least, he didn't want to be sucked into such a decision without having his own opinion heard. Woody wanted to go with him, but Papa said it was a meeting for heads of households only, and he insisted on going alone. From the time he heard about it, he purposely drank nothing stronger than tea. He shaved and trimmed his mustache and put on a silk tie. His limp was nearly gone now, but he carried his cane and went staggering off down the narrow walkway between the barracks, punching at the packed earth in front of him. About 4 o'clock I was playing hopscotch in the fire break with 3 other girls. It was winter. The sun had already dropped behind Mount Whitney. Now a wind was rising, the kind of biting, steady wind that could bring an ocean of sand into camp at any moment with almost no warning. I was hurrying back to the barracks when I heard a great commotion inside the mess hall, men shouting wildly, as if a fire had broken out. The loudest voice was Papa's cursing, "Ita, Ita! Bakayaru! Bakayaru!" The door of the mess hall flew open and a short, beefy man came tearing out. He jumped off the porch, running as his feet hit the ground. He didn't get far. Papa came through the doorway, right behind him, in a flying leap, bellowing like a warrior. "Hi-ya!" He let go of his cane as he landed on the man's back, and they both tumbled into the dirt. The wind was rising. Half the sky was dark, with a tide of sand pouring toward us. The dust billowed and spun as they kicked and pummeled and thrashed each other. At the meeting, when Papa stood up to defend the yes position, murmurs of Inu, Inu began to circulate around the mess hall. This man then jumped up at the speaker's table and made the charge aloud. Papa went for him. Now outside in the dirt, Papa had him by the throat and would have strangled him, but some other men pulled them apart. I had never seen him so livid, that means mad, yelling and out of his head with rage. While they pinned his arms, he kicked at the sand, sending wind-blown bursts of it toward the knot of men, dragging his opponent out of reach. A few moments later, the sandstorm hit. The sky turned black as night. Everyone ran for cover. 2 men hustled Papa to our barracks. The fighting against the wind and the sand to get there calmed him down some. Back inside, he sat by the stove holding his teacup and didn't speak for a long time. One cheekbone was raw where it had been mashed into the sand. Mama kept pouring him little trickles of tea. We listened to the wind howl. When the sand died down, the sky outside stayed black. The storm had knocked out the electricity all over the camp. It was a cold, lonely night, and we huddled around our oil stove while Mama and Woody and Chizo began to talk about the day. A young woman came in, a friend of Chizu's, who lived across the way. She had studied in Japan for several years. About the time I went to bed, she and Papa began to sing songs in Japanese, warming their hands on either side of the stove, facing each other in its in its glow. After a while, Papa sang the first line of the Japanese national anthem, Kimi ga Yo. Woody, Chizu, and Mama knew the tune, so they hummed along while Papa and the other woman sang the words. It can be a hearty or a plaintive tune, depending on your mood. From Papa that night, it was a deep-throated lament. Almost invisible in the stove's small glow, tears began running down his face. Lament means showing sadness. I had seen him cry a few times before. It only happened when he was singing or when someone else sang a song that moved him. He played the three-stringed samisen, which Kiyo and I called his pinko pinko. We would laugh together when we heard him plucking it and whining out old Japanese melodies. We would hold our ears and giggle. It was always a great joke between us, except for those rare times when Papa began to weep at the lyrics. Then we would just stare quietly, as I did that night, from some hidden corner of the room. This was always mysterious and incomprehensible. The national anthem, I later learned, is what he had sung every morning as a schoolboy in Japan. They still sing it there, the way American kids pledge allegiance to the flag. It is not a martial song or a victory song, the way many national anthems are. It is really a poem whose words go back to the 9th century. May thy peaceful reign last long. May it last for thousands of years, till this tiny stone will grow into a massive rock, and the moss will cover it deep and thick. It is a patriotic song that can also be read as a proverb, as a personal credo for endurance. The stone can be the kingdom, or it can be a man's life. The moss is the greenery that in time will spring even from a rock. In Japan, before the turn of the century, outside my father's house, there stood one of those stone lanterns, with 4 stubby legs and a small pagoda-like roof. Each morning, someone in the household would pour a bucketful of water over his lantern, and after several years, a skin of living vegetation began to show on the stone. As a boy, he was taught that the last line of the anthem refers to a certain type of mossy lichen with exquisitely tiny white flowers sprinkled in amongst the green. Okay, so I think the reason why the excerpt ends here is because it is showing the Papa's nostalgia for Japan and his respect for his homeland, and also his sadness at maybe leaving that homeland to go to a country that is going to treat him so poorly. But he still feels like he can continue and endure like the moss on those lanterns. So identify the 2 meanings for the Japanese word inu. So the Japanese word inu means dog, but it also means a sympathizer or someone who is an informer. Someone who like basically rats on someone else. According to Gian Wakutuski, Houston, what is the most divisive issue among the internees? Okay, so what is this called again? The most divisive is this form that they had to fill out. The application to leave clearance. So the oath they had to fill out to prove their I spelled legion. To America or to USA. Why doesn't Woody argue with Papa? It isn't part of their culture for a child to argue with their father. Okay, on what type of occasion does Papa cry? According to the author, Papa cries when singing traditional Japanese songs. Okay, if you need to see this, you gotta pause the recording. Now we're going to, as I told you before, we will look at our evidence log and our summary chart because we didn't do this in class. So, so we'll put whatever date you're filling this out. I shouldn't close that. Again. So this is a novel called Farewell to Manzanar, and it's a very good novel. I would recommend you check it out and read it. But in this excerpt from Farewell to Manzanar, we know that it starts with let's see, let's put the United States. The United States wanted to speed up the relocation program and weed out the disloyal while also getting people to enlist into the military. So they forced all Japanese internment camp members to fill out a questionnaire that proved their loyalty. Okay, so that's one part that we could answer, but we could also put about Papa. Papa wanted to ignore all his problems and remain drunk, but the oath problem came up and he wanted to prove his loyalty to the USA, so he agreed to say yes to the question on the oath paper. Okay, so if you didn't get that, again, you can pause the video. Now for your evidence log, I think you can do this on your own. Look for a piece of evidence that talks about fear being a powerful emotion. And, oh, it just started raining. So a good quote for that would maybe be, you know what, I would probably say, you know what, one of these probably quotes on page 708, maybe this one would be good to show that the government wanted to, you know, weed out disloyal people while also getting people interested in the military or joining the military. Okay, so I would recommend putting that for your text evidence, and do your best with that. So that is the end of this video. Keep a lookout for the video for next week that you're going to watch before our class next Wednesday.